Joshua chapters 7 and 8 today, and having come off the back of the invasion of the city of Jericho, this is now on to the invasion of the city of Ai, spelled AI. I assume that's pronounced I. Gonna go with I anyway. Having done so well at Jericho, some spies go up to the city of Ai and see that there's not many people there. It's going to be a bit of a walkover. So Joshua decides he's just going to send 3,000 troops and then sort that out. Trouble is, it goes completely wrong. These troops are then chased off. It says something about 36 of them being killed, which doesn't sound like a total disaster. But either way, the Israelites get their butts kicked there. And Joshua is beside himself with, well, I don't know what you'd call it, but I mean, he tears his clothes, he throws himself on the ground, despairing to God, oh, what are we going to do? And the Israelite elders apparently sprinkle dust in their hair, because apparently that's some sort of conveyance of despair. It's a bit weird, that, isn't it? That raises a good point, actually, because I'm trying to interpret all this through a modern lens, and yet we're dealing with a time where something goes wrong, you tear your clothes and throw yourselves on the floor and sprinkle dust on your head. That's clearly a very different mindset and culture from now. So I'm aware I've got to keep that in mind, but this is a good example of just how different they are to things now. Anyway, Joshua's beside himself with all this, says to God, what are we going to do? And he's really worried that the Israelites are suddenly be wiped out. It doesn't seem to occur to him that you sent 3,000 blokes and 36 of them got killed and you lost. Maybe send 100,000. You know, I presume he's got I think it was 600,000 and odd at the second census, so some of them may be dead, but I mean, it's going to be around that number still. That would seem like the obvious solution to his problem. It turns out, though, that actually perhaps that wouldn't have helped to have sent more troops to Ai, because it emerges that the reason that the Israelites lost there was because during the attack on Jericho, some of the men sinned during the siege and all the rest of it. Bit of a light bulb moment, I suppose, in terms of, so right, really, if God is not on your side, you're not going to win. Although, that still begs the question, did you not win because you only sent 3,000 people? It's a difficult one to work with. But either way, the story is that it wasn't because of the lack of people, it's because of the sinning that happened before. This raises the obvious question of what was the sin and who done it. And God has quite an elaborate way of working through this to sort it out, whittling people down from tribe to clan to family down to individual. It's just there's a few. And God does this. They bring forward one of the tribes, and they bring forward one of the clans and one of the families, and then they pick out the individual. It seems almost like game showing, because presumably God would knew in the first place who it was. And there's nothing clear about what that screening process was. It's just about someone was brought forward. So presumably God would have known all along. But it's quite dramatic anyway. And anyway, this chap called Achan, A-C-H-A-N, I'm going to call it Achan, turns out to be, well, certainly the one in the story who committed the sin, although it does sound like there were others as well. It's interesting how this is then approached by Joshua, because Joshua walks up and the opening words are, my son, as in, my son, what did you do, basically. And because it opens with my son, it has a sort of a soft kind of, tell me what you did. It's okay, we're going to sort it out. And sure enough, Achan's like, I'm so sorry, I sinned against God, and I found in Jericho some silver and some gold and a really nice Babylonian robe, so I took them back to my tent and I hid them. Joshua then sends someone to go and check his tent, and sure enough, they come back with all this stuff. And it feels like at this point, it's going to be, you've been open and honest, you've put it right and all the rest of it, you're fine, off you go. But no, what actually happens is that they identify all the others who did these things, and then they're stoned to death, and then they're piled up in a big heap, and they set fire to them. I mean, don't get me wrong, God did make very clear, and Joshua did pass on the point, no looting, no plundering, no nothing, don't take any of the stuff. You can take the stuff for God, but nothing for yourselves. And this Achan and these other people did that, so they can't complain that the rules weren't clear. But yeah, and it's forgiveness is not a thing yet, it would seem. Or rather, we've had mentioned that people can be forgiven, but the consequence still has to stand. So clearly, this is an instance where it doesn't say that he's forgiven or anything, just that he confesses and then they kill him by throwing rocks at him until he dies. Moving on from that, God then says to Joshua, basically states the blindingly obvious to Joshua, that you need to go back and get the city of Ai, so just take the whole army, and then it'll be a walk in the park. And of course that time it works, but it's not like a magic. It feels like it's sold almost as a magical thing because the sinning has been laid to rest. But instead of sending 3,000 soldiers, you sent 600,000. You're like, well, that probably would solve the problem, you'd think. But it's clearly not the moral of the story. It is quite an elaborate invasion again. It's not marching around the city walls this time. They hide a reserve force somewhere out the back of the city, and then Joshua and the rest of the army go up to the front doors and knock. We're here to take over your city. They get chased off by the Ions. I don't know what the plural. Never mind. They chase after Joshua. So Joshua and all the men there retreat. It says that everyone comes out of the city of Ai, which it seems like, again, another example of excessively total language. Extremely unlikely that everyone left. But anyway, there's certainly enough there that the hidden bit of the army then invade the city, set light to the whole thing. Joshua then sees the column of smoke rising in the distance. And, aha, they've got the city. So then they turn around and they go and wipe out all the Ai-ish people. So like 12,000 of them or something, I believe. Another example here of the total language doesn't make any sense. They say they put everyone to the sword, everyone is killed, and then separate, say, except the king who is spared. Right, okay, well, that sort of makes sense. But then it turns out the king isn't spared at all. What they do is they impale him on a pole and then put him up for everyone to look at until the evening. They take him down in the evening because there's a rule back from Leviticus, I think it was, that you're not allowed to leave people up on a pole overnight. So it's there's a lot going on there. But I don't know, if you impale someone on a pole, I mean, you can sort of envisage how that might happen or be done, achieved. It's just it's barbaric, isn't it? I mean, you're not just taking over the city, and presumably everyone else is dead, so you're putting this guy on a pole. Who's that for the benefit of? Just so the Israelites can have a rubberneck at it or something. I don't know. It's a bit messed up, but it's kind of the theme, isn't it? There's an interesting part in that God's saying this time that they can loot things for themselves, because this was obviously just what Achan was put to death for. So there's obviously nothing intrinsically wrong in taking this stuff. It's just because God said you couldn't. Presumably God said you couldn't because he didn't want all those worldly things infecting, for want of a better word, the Israelite culture or something along those lines. But then he changed his mind and he's like, you can have this lot. And there's no explanation of why they can have it this time. Not quite sure. We'll have to keep an eye, which I appreciate makes a lot of things we're keeping an eye on. But it's amazing how much of this does, over the course of reading further, start to make sense in the big picture. And as I said previously, the individual details I'm not sure necessarily matter too much. They're sort of interesting and sometimes fun. But I still think it's the big picture that matters most here. I suppose in this case, compared to Jericho, which is a bunch of people marching around a wall and shouting and then the walls fall over, highly unlikely to have been real, in respect that that's not something that generally happens. That would be a miracle. This one is more of a straightforward case of go up, knock on the front door, run away, sneak in the back door whilst they're running away and then kill them all. It's pretty standard. Nothing miraculous has happened there or anything. If anything, even the whole thing has been sold as miraculous because now the sinning's being rectified. Suddenly we win at Ai. But the difference, of course, is having sent 3,000 troops versus 600,000. It's like, well, that seems like a perfectly obvious that would solve the problem, but it's been almost sold as some sort of, it's because the sinning has been sorted out. So I don't know. It's fun looking at stories again. It's after Numbers and Leviticus, which was all more concepts than stories. This is interesting to come back to. But again, I'm not quite sure what to make of it all. And we'll just have to soldier on, I think, and see what happens over the rest of the book.